it's me, Marilia, and I want to, first of all, apologize for the inconvenience. I originally uploaded this video a day ago, and there was a problem with the rendering process when it was exporting, and only half the video was exported. I didn't catch this, and it was published on YouTube, and unfortunately, it wasn't complete. I want to thank you very much for your patience, and I want to apologize to you for the inconvenience. It is complete now. I hope that you enjoy it, and thank you again. Hello, it's me, Marilia, and I want to welcome you to Salto del Gato. This is my YouTube channel, and this is my Gumshoe playlist. This is where I take an astrological chart, I cast it as an event chart, and then I follow the rhythm of the chart and explore a crime. The crime that I am going to be exploring today is, of course, the Stephen Smith crime, and that took place on July 8th of 2015, somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m. in Bronson, South Carolina. Now, I'm going to be reading my notes, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time for two things. One, for my cracky voice. I have chalked it up to a combination of allergies and old age vocal cords. And the other thing that I'm going to apologize for is that I'm not always going to be looking at the camera. So here we go. As I enter this chart, and hopefully you have seen some of my other videos that I gave a little bit of an overview, but basically, in case you know nothing about astrology, this is an astrological chart. The natural zodiac starts here on the sign of Aries, and it goes around a 360-degree circle until it returns back to Aries. Now, these little pie sections, those are called houses. They're 30 degrees. They start at 0 degrees and go to 29 degrees. Each house in the whole house system that I use contains 30 degrees. Now, this represents a constellation. As the planet and the sun moves through the constellations, they land in different zodiac signs or constellations. So when you're casting an event chart, you cast it for a specific date, time, and place. And wherever the planets and the luminaries land, that's how you interpret the chart, and they can land anywhere in this chart. The other thing is that signs, the zodiac signs, and the houses don't necessarily mean the same thing. So a sign can be in any house. The house always maintains the things it is associated with. Those never change. The signs also maintain their characteristics, but they are applied to the areas that the houses represent. I don't know if that was more information that you need, but that's kind of what this is all about. So, for instance, in this chart that I cast, here in the first house, the owner of this house in this chart happens to be Gemini. Gemini tells me who owns the house, because it is the ruler of Gemini that will own this house. I know that the ruler of Gemini happens to be Mercury. So I can say Mercury owns the first house. Now, the next question that I would ask is Mercury home? The owner home? No, the owner is not home. Mercury is not here. Mercury is somewhere else in the chart. As we can see, he's over here. Mercury happens to be in the second house. Now, in the chart, I know that Mercury landed on the sign of Gemini. It's in the actual critical degree, which is a 29th degree. There are certain degrees, 0 and 29, that are considered critical because they're transitionary degrees. So that means that either in the case of a 29th degree, that cycle in that house, in that zodiac sign, is being completed. And so there's a transition. The energy is transitioning out of that sign. If it were 0 degrees, then it would mean that it is transitioning into the sign. That's pretty much all you need to know, but that's how this works. So, so let's commence to enter the chart. We enter the chart through the first house. The sign on the cusp of the first house is Gemini, and I'm going to commence reading it. So this is a nocturnal chart. The sun is under the horizon and closest to the ascendant. According to my information, I use the rising sign to determine the Egyptian bound lord of this chart. It is Saturn. Saturn represents established power, influence, and authority. It represents individuals who are older, much older than the victim in this case. Lord Saturn is known as the maker and breaker of bones, the grim reaper. In Greek mythology, he is Kronos, and Kronos was the god who ate his children. Saturn here is in retrograde motion and has moved into the 6th house. Now, retrograde implies that the planets appear to be moving backwards, and what that infers is that they are going over or repeating something. Retrograde implies trying to complete or end something, but dealing with it repeatedly. It's not a clean break. It's preparing to end or close a chapter. In this case, this chapter. But it will return. Now, later in this narrative, I will review the 6th house that Saturn has just moved into, and the 7th house that Saturn has just left, because those are important houses. For now, it's just important to know that the 7th house is the house of the killer and is owned in this chart by Jupiter, who rules Sagittarius. Now, that has significance because Sagittarius is associated with lawyers and with wide open spaces, hunting grounds, and sports. It has other significations, but because this is a chart that was cast specifically for the crime of a death that appears to be a murder, we're going to apply the planets and their representations. We're going to focus in on the things that would apply to a crime. Now, Saturn also owns the 8th house in this chart, and the 8th house is known as the entry gates to hell. It's the place of death and the dead and of the belongings of the dead. Here it is hosting Pluto, which happens to be the lord of the underground. The killer in this chart appears to have distanced themselves and is hiding. It alludes to an established, powerful, influential older person of authority with a dark hidden side to them, being assisted in a massive cover-up that will be difficult to unravel, or that the killer is being assisted by such an individual as I have just described, someone older, established, and of influence, power, and authority. And in this chart, one of the things that I found, and that's why I reverted to using the Egyptian lords, was that there are many layers to the chart. This young man was involved with many people in his life, and specifically in the days and leading up to this particular night. So there's a lot of associations with different people. So it wasn't a clear-cut direct hit to the killer. I have had charts where I look at one or two houses and boom, I'm right there. But in the house of the killer in this chart, it is empty. So I have to then go to ownerships and relationships to find what is going on there. And because the chart is, and an empty house doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't hold a message. But in this case, it's not easily revealing who the killer is. So now, for me, what I found in this chart, and I really tried to apply myself to this as if it was a totally different, unassociated case to anything that I had been working on previously. That was my intention, but I could not escape the fact that as I am looking into crime charts, I seem to find a pattern appearing between certain planets. And in this case, there was a repetitive theme to some of the actors, if you will, and I'm going to say that the planets are the actors in this scene, that I had just experienced in a couple of recent charts that I had cast. I'm going to try really hard not to name names and link things, because I want us all to look at this as if we were totally uninformed and coming across it and just looking at facts and see what there is there. But one thing about this chart is it keeps confirming and reconfirming a repetitive theme. There's duality, there's fate, and there's familiarity. That is a recurring theme. That's a theme from when you enter. With Gemini on the cusp, there's a duality. So there's a couple of things involved here. Maybe you can help me figure it out. So what's the vibe of the first house? Like I said, fate and familiarity. It's repetitive in this chart that the events that occurred on this night were pretty much fated. They were set in motion by a series of fated occurrences. Now, what do I mean by that? We'll start with the 29th degree. Gemini, which is the house on the cusp, the house of the incident, if you will, of the victim, where we find the victim, is at 29 degrees, which is a critical degrees. That means that was completed. That life was completed. That doesn't mean that when a life is completed, it ends in death, but for this particular person, it was completed. Now, does that mean that his life purpose, or the purpose of this life was to come in here to somehow or another complete some karmic debt, fulfill some karmic lessons? I don't know that, but you can infer something like that, because the 29th degree means, hey, we're here, we're finishing this up, and we're moving out. And that seems to be what happened. Additionally, this young man's birthday is January 29th. He was 19 years old, but it was January 29th. Again, repetitive 29-degree fate symbolism. So another thing is that nothing that I am saying here is tethered to anything that's scientific. Astrology, for me, is not tethered to any scientific fact. And I am completely comfortable with that, because it is, for me, a combination of symbolism, a language of symbols, and intuition. So keep that in mind. But for me, the 29th degree appearing twice in association with this chart is confirmation that this was a fated incident. But it'll come up again. Now, the victim is also very acquainted with whoever caused his death. He's acquainted with them, and he's acquainted with the area and location of where it happened, and it was all very familiar to him. So it wasn't like a stranger came by and did this, and he wasn't in a strange place. He had been there before. He had frequented it. It was familiar to him. Just because it was familiar to him, though, he may not have, he seemed to have been, from everything, because of the fact that the combinations that are coming on here that are representing him show him to have been a very sensitive, possibly a bit intuitive young man. He was a bit of a dreamer, and he had aspirations, and he appeared very tough on the outside, but he was really very gentle on the inside. So the energies, although they were familiar to him, he wasn't maybe completely aware of their deep, dark shadows, or of what these individuals that he was interacting with were capable of doing. There is a duality here, and of course there's more than one person involved. Now, at the time leading up to this crime, there are conversations, there's gossip, rumor, innuendo. Maybe too much was said. There's that kind of a vibe. There was just too much talking, too much was said. The first house is empty. The owner is Mercury, and it's not in the first house. However, it is at home within the sign that it rules, which is Gemini. Mercury indicates communication, short distance travel, vehicles, roads, familiar areas, and people. Again, which we just stated. Now, Mercury, as far as gender goes, so if we wanted to know is this a man or a woman, Mercury, the first house relates to the victim. It's a sign that has no gender. It can be either male or female. So interestingly enough, Stephen was an openly gay young man. He was not hiding it. He had, definitely made his identity known as to who he was. Now, Mercury is in the house that it owns. Mercury is in the house that, in the sign, the zodiac sign, I'm sorry. Mercury is in the zodiac sign that it owns at 29 degrees Gemini. And like I just said, this is a critical degree. It is considered a fated degree, referring to the end and completion of a cycle. It is a transition degree, implying a crossing over. Each zodiac sign spans over a 30-degree segment of a chart that begins at 0 degrees and ends at 29 degrees. The last degree is a line in the sand. And so Stephen was born, again, this is just me repeating it, on the 29th day of January, and he was an Aquarius. He was born under the sign of Aquarius. Now, there is another set of divinatory symbols. It's another divinatory symbol system called the Sabian symbols that what it does is it applies a poem and a symbol to each degree of every sign in the entire zodiac. And for 29 degrees Gemini, the Sabian symbol is the mockingbird. And what that symbolizes to me is that there may have been mocking, ridicule, and taunting taking place in the conversations exchanged on this evening. So maybe Stephen was being mocked. Perhaps Stephen was trying to fit in, ignoring the taunts and mimics, but not expecting the fatal outcome. Let's go on. So one gets the feeling that Stephen met fate on a lonely country road that evening. Now let's move into the second house. The second house is considered a very unfortunate house, and I'll give you a glimpse of what the second house of this chart looks like. So here's the first house where we learned all the stuff that we just learned about. This is the second house, and as you can see, it's a bit busy. It has Mercury, who is still in the sign of Gemini, but it also has Mars and the Sun. These are just not kind of in the same order, but yeah, there you go. Saw that? They're magnets, so they want to jump. So here in the second house, we have Mars and we have the Sun, and they are not in Gemini. They're in this sign of Cancer. Now, this is the house that is considered a very unfortunate house because the planets move up this way. See, the wheel turns this way. And when it is here in the second house, this second house is said to be laying on its back. So all the planets that are in here are laying on their back and facing up, which is a weak position to be in. Now, curiously, that is the position that Stephen's body was found when he was laying on the road. He was on his back and facing up. Cancer is on the cusp of house number 2, but it is intercepted in the chart. And Leo also influences it because Leo is the zodiac sign that intercepts it. This means the Sun owns Leo and also influences the second house. So let me explain to you what I mean by an intercepted house. Here is the computerized chart, okay? So here's the first house in the computerized chart. And as you can see, the houses kind of overlap signs. So here, the house cusp starts here. As you can see, Gemini begins, part of it is over the ascendant over into the 12th house. And then it ends at 30 degrees and Cancer comes in here into the 2nd house. You can see. So that's why Gemini is in 29 degrees. And that's what I mean by interception. That means that that particular house is influenced by 2 signs. And there's a lot of houses in this chart that have that duality. Now, some people will just say, no, this is a whole house system and we're just going to apply one sign to each house. And that's fine. And I've often done that. But I've decided not to do that in this case because from the very beginning when I walked in here, I was presented with this energy of, hey, there's 2 stories here. And it is in how they combine and interact that the answers lie. So we're going to try to see what all that means. Let's get back to reading. So the 2nd house is intercepted, and so it is influenced by the zodiac sign of Cancer and the zodiac sign of Leo, and those are the 2 luminaries, which are the moon owns Cancer, the sun owns Leo, and there is that dynamic, almost like a full moon dynamic, where when there is a full moon, it is in total opposition to the sun. That's just what happens. They are across from each other. And the dynamics in that is very intense because the moon is watery, soft, emotional. The sun is fiery, aggressive, impetuous. So blending those 2 energies is like trying to blend vinegar and oil. They tend to want to pull away from each other. And that's what we're experiencing here in this 2nd house. The 2nd house is not empty, as Mercury is here, although it is moving out of the 2nd house and rising up into the 1st house. But Mars and the Sun are also here, and the Sun empowers the Martian tendencies toward aggression and anger. Even though they're not exactly conjunct, when the Sun and any other planet is so close, the Sun is going to overpower it. It's called consuming it. And so the Sun, what it means is that the Sun filters through that sign, and whatever that sign stands for is enhanced or consumed. Mars is a very strong, fiery planet and energy, so the Sun energizes, fuels it even more. So it's going to make it even more dominant. And in this case, the Sun empowers the Martian tendencies towards aggression and anger. It's almost like edging someone on, where others are encouraging aggression. Stephen may have been the recipient of this behavior from others. So we already see that there was a conversation that took place. Maybe too much was said. Maybe there was a little bit of anger started rising and some ridicule and mimicking and taunting. And he tried to maintain his cool and kind of just brush it off, but it kept going. And the more perhaps that he didn't respond or tried to hold back, the more frustrated the fiery Martian energy got and the angrier they got. And so maybe the rest of the crowd started edging him on. Come on, come on. That's kind of the energy that I see playing out here. Now, the 2nd house is part of what is called the 2nd 8th gate. And this is known as the portal of Pluto or the gate of hell. And so we've already seen that in this chart, Pluto is in the 8th house. Now, it's not in Scorpio, which is the sign that it owns, but it is in Capricorn. So we could say Saturn is hosting Pluto in his house. But the 8th house here is it's the house that deals with the dead. It's the house of death. It's like the chart says, it's the gateway to hell. And there is a stripping away of all things associated with life in this house. So in the eighth house is where you enter into the gates of hell, where everything is stripped away from you, including your life. Sorry, let's change this a little bit. And in its opposite house, or its opposite gateway, is where it releases. So in the second house, that's laying on its back facing upwards as it moves up, is considered the act of being released from torment. In this case, not always, but in this case, the release was into death. And that's what that gateway implies. You enter in, you go through hell, and then you're released into death. Let me read that again. The eighth house is the entry into hell, and the second represents the release. So, as in death, in the eighth house, there is a stripping away of all things associated with life. And you think about that a minute. What you're going through is sort of a torment, a letting go of everything you know, and that can be torturous and hard. And in the second, you've completed that, and so you surrender to it, and you are released to rebirth into a new life. Now, this house is associated with the expectation of benefit. And so here's another thing that seems to come into this chart and is repetitive here. So this house is associated with the expectation of benefit. In this case, was Stephen expecting benefit? At least 3 energy groups are at work here: the victim and his peers, a fatherly association, and a grandfather influence. Now, this is a most unfortunate house where unexpected, sudden, tragic events occur. Situations that can otherwise be overlooked or brushed off suddenly can't be and are taken to extremes. This placement is especially poor for Mars or the Sun, which they happen to be in. No planet is said to rejoice in this house. There are allies and supporters of whoever initiated the conflict that occurred here. Look at the throat, neck, down to the shoulder area of the body. It may tell a story. Someone assisted in the activities. Someone was friends with or witnessed the crime, and they may help the prosecution process. These people are of wealth and substance. The ancient astrologer Lily wrote, Mars and Sun are never well placed in this house. It indicates the dispersion of substance. I interpret that to mean it will cost money, resources, and time to unravel. Now, the moon owns the second house, but the moon is not present here because it is in the 11th house in Aries. The 11th house is known to be the place of friendships, acquaintances, and gatherings and groups. However, the moon represents strong communications, intellect, and perhaps knowledge of hidden things. It may not reveal everything, or it may reveal too much. As the moon represents the goddess or feminine gender, I will associate it with Stephen's feminine characteristics. In this chart, it is not in a good zodiac sign because it's in Aries. It is visiting the house that Mars owns. That also plays into the homosexual identity of Stephen, that he was very passive in many ways. He was very nurturing, very affectionate, very caring, very protective. But he was also very much in a male body, and he was very much, that kind of just filtered through. Even though he was feminine appearing, he had a very strong masculine force of energy inside of him. So he also dealt with an inner conflict. Now, here's the thing. Cancer is a water sign, and Stephen may have been around water that evening, or water may have been connected to this crime. Now, this is factual. His shoes were wet. They had mud that may have dried and left sand on the soles and tops of the shoes. That's why when they say that he was walking down the street, it is questioned because there was no evidence of that. If his shoes were wet, you would think that as he walked down the street, he would have left some track marks, mud. Even if the mud had dried up, you would see that, but there was none of that. Or there may have been liquid substances ingested around him, like alcohol, even though the autopsy said that there was no evidence of such things in his body. But that doesn't mean that other people around him weren't drinking. Now, this might mean that a fight broke out around the water. There is a moon-sun dynamic, which is the sun in Cancer. Not a good place for the sun because it's fire of the sun and water in the sign of Cancer. It points to an inner conflict and a conflict of interest. And Cancer is a sign of being protective, feeling one needs to protect something. Mars in Cancer, again, you have the same repetitive fire and water dynamic, and it indicates someone who is ready to fight to protect their home and family. Now, opposing interests clash and drama takes over. The assertive energy of the sun fuels the anger and aggression of Mars. The moon is not well placed in Aries. It is weak and easily overcome, and the sun ill-placed in Cancer, where it is out of its element and frustrated, which can indicate a loss of control. Moon in the 11th house in Aries signifies a group of friends. But the moon is out of its element here and may not realize that these are fake friends. The moon, again, being Stephen, he was out of his element. Pisces influences this house, and Chiron is in Pisces, retrograde. There's an R symbol. The R symbol, the R in a chart is a symbol for retrograde motion, which implies that the planets appear to be moving backwards. And this means that there's an energy of repeating, redoing, returning. Interesting because Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and the south node of Karma are all retrograde in this chart, indicating a revisiting, redoing, unearthing, revealing, digging up, exhuming, and re-examining energy, which is currently taking place. Now, the chart suggests that something is buried under the earth. Well, we know that Stephen's body is being exhumed or was exhumed. And so the question is, will the new autopsy reveal new clues? The chart suggests that more information can be found, and a lot of it is in forensic electronic investigations of smartphones and any other information that can be redeemed from electronics. Now, I am limited in what I can extract from the chart, and I am not clear yet on what, if anything, the results of all of this is going to be. There are some questions, and it may be that those questions are going to remain, and much will be inconclusive. But something in this whole process may trigger someone to come forward. Chiron is a wound that can't be healed, and Pisces is ongoing deception. Stephen may have felt energized by the prospects of inclusion within this group or with this older person, but they saw him as impaired, and that's represented by Chiron and Pisces. The moon in the 11th house of Aries, moon is the hidden thoughts, and Mars, desire to act in mutual reception, means they're in each other's signs, but not friends. Although Mars may pretend to be inclusive, the moon cannot actualize or reciprocate the desire. The Aries push to act now causes impulsiveness that turns to anger, unleashing aggression. A war of words turns violent. Head injuries are indicated because Aries indicates the head, and the moon is in Aries. And the moon also indicates the upper torso area. So moon and Mercury indicate words and voices. There were shouting and or threats exchanged, and I question, was someone trying to shut someone up. So what this sounds like to me, if we go to the chart here and we go to the 11th house, is that there is a gathering here. Stephen was either invited or to a group gathering. It may be that he went there to see an older person and then joined in or was included in this particular group, who then turned on him, taunting him, teasing him, belittling him, pushing him to aggression. Come on, fight, that kind of a thing. And in that exchange, that war of words got violent, and someone struck him. That's what it seems like to me. Let's explore a couple of these things. I've got to go back to this chart here. Now, I don't have this computer software program. It's something that I get free from online, and all it does is it gives me the chart. So I have to then interpret the chart. And I'm sorry, if I had that program, I could move you along with me and split the screen, but I'm not that fancy or advanced yet. So let's look here at the 11th house, what we have going. And I want to point you to, if you can see this symbol here, that's Chiron, that's an asteroid, and it is known as the wounded healer. And that little R represents retrograde. And there are other planets here that have that little R next to it. Saturn is retrograde. The South Node is retrograde. Chiron was retrograde. Neptune is retrograde. And Pluto is retrograde. So there's a lot of repetitive symbolism here, a symbolism of repetitive acts, things having to go back, undo and redo, dig things up and re-examine them. That energy is all over this chart. I think there was a bit of talking, a bit of taunting, and maybe a bit of boasting. All of this got out of hand. From what I'm gathering from this chart, this doesn't appear to be that some strong, powerful man that Stephen was involved with set out to plan this to kill him. I think that what happened here was that he was with a group of people of his similar age, whether that was that they came upon him or how he got together with them, I'm not clear, but he wound up with a group of people, and there was a war of words, and there was an exchange of conversations, and that became more and more aggressive, and then other people edged somebody on, and violence broke out, and Stephen was the recipient of injuries to the head. Somebody hit him. I don't think it was, even when they hit him, I don't think they intended to kill him. I think that it was just that things got out of hand and this happened. That's what I'm picking up from this chart. That doesn't mean that there wasn't other people involved, and we're going to go there, and that there wasn't, that he wasn't involved with somebody else, and that there wasn't more going on this evening with other people. But what led to his death was an unintended circumstance of a war of words that got out of hand. That's what I keep picking up. Chiron is a wound that can't be healed. And Pisces is ongoing deception. So the wound that can't be healed is the fact that when they hit him in the head, they killed him. Or they had done such a degree of damage that there was no way he was going to come back from that. They said that in the autopsy, his head was so deformed that they had to reconstruct it with putty just for the funeral. So maybe that he was hit more than once. That's something that the new autopsy should show us, I think. We'll see what we find out. Maybe that's one of the things that will be revealed. Now, Chiron is a wound that can't be healed. Pisces is ongoing deception. Stephen may have felt energized by the prospects of inclusion within this group or with this older person, but they saw him as impaired. And now that can apply to the fact that there's 3 different groups of energy, remember, that are taking place here. So in the one group, that can apply to that feeling included with a group of his peers, but they were fake friends. That could also imply feeling included and cared for and desired by an older person. But again, Stephen was naive because the older person saw him as impaired. And by impaired, it's like somebody weak and not someone that they would want, they could care for. So there's a sense that Stephen was needy emotionally, and this other person wasn't able to supply that or wanted to fulfill that need in him. Anyway, the moon in the 11th house is in Aries, which again, the moon, hidden thoughts, and Mars, desire to act, and mutual reception, but not friends. Not friends. Mutual receptions. We're there, we're visiting, we're hanging out, we're engaging we're engaging with each other, but we're not friends. I am curious about the autopsy and what it will show, and I'm interested, and I have to give you a trigger warning here because this is the parts that gets a little intimate into this young man's life, and I feel really uncomfortable about even discussing it. But it's going to be discussed everywhere else. And if I omit it from here, it's not going to give us the whole story of what led up to this event. So my curiosity, not in being a voyeur, not being invasive or trying to be a voyeur, but just out of psychological curiosity, what his body might show. I'm interested in signs of other people's bodily fluids in specifically intimate areas of his body, because we know that they did an intimacy test. You know what I'm talking about. But did they check for indications of oral activity? And I wonder why they conducted this type of testing if they thought this was a hit and run case. Is this testing routine for every crime scene? Or were they suspecting this was not a vehicle-involved crime and were trying to gather DNA evidence to identify Stephen's last known intimate contacts in order to trace his activity on the night of the crime to see who that might be? The first autopsy stated there was no evidence of drugs or alcohol, but the chart shows the victim was near water and or other liquids. Apologize for my vocal fry. Let's move into the 3rd house. Leo is in the sign on the cusp of the 3rd house, and the sun owns this place, but it is not home. As we just discussed, it is in Cancer in the 2nd place. And so what is Leo doing in the 3rd place? Well, Leo implies prominence and kind of an elitist sort of vibe. So the 3rd place, which is the neighborhood, so all of a sudden this more affluent individual or energy is in Stephen's neighborhood. Stephen may have said, "Ooh, this is an opportunity that might be profitable. This might be a profitable alliance." And for Stephen, that turned out to be a false assumption. But the sun also influences the things of the 3rd house. So again, the 3rd house is your neighborhood, your routine, the places you travel and go around, the schools you attend, the people that you pass and interact with frequently. It's your car. It's the roads you drive on. And here's something interesting, because Stephen's car was an issue in this. Stephen's car was found 3 miles away from his body, and it is assumed that he had run out of gas because the gas cap was off. And I think they tried to start the car and they couldn't. And They found Stephen's wallet in the car. So what does this mean? Did Stephen drive that car there, leave it there, and was picked up by somebody else? Did Stephen really run out of gas and leave his car there and his wallet and was walking 3 miles up the road? Where was he going? And why not take your wallet? Stephen had his phone with him, but the phone was intact. It was in his pocket. It wasn't, if this was a hit and run, his phone never flew out of his pocket or anything. It was right there in his pocket. So the third house and the sun being in the third house brings a focus to the car. Now, these things are of the third house are, like I said, the friends, the neighborhood, the roads, and the vehicle. Leo brings an air of royalty to the neighborhood. So somebody from uptown came downtown to the hood. That's what I read out of that. And Stephen saw it as a possible profitable alliance. So we can read into that what we may. But this is another indicator that the people involved in this crime were familiar with each other and well known in the community. And when I say involved with the crime, because this is such a deceptive cover up, it's so delusional, the energy here. Oh gosh, it's like you don't know which way is up here. But this person could have just been in the neighborhood specifically for an exchange of services and had nothing to do with the crime. But their presence there might have been a catalyst to something. But there is a vibe here of bragging, boasting, and too much talk. So did Stephen maybe talk too much about this alliance? Was someone overconfident and having fun showing off? I don't know. Let's go to the fourth house. Virgo is on the cusp of the fourth house. I'll just mention this in case you're lost. Sometimes I get lost. So here's the fourth house. Virgo's on the cusp. There are 2 planets here visiting. There are 2 planets visiting and an asteroid. And if we look at the actual chart here of the fourth house, you see that Virgo is here on the cusp. See the space? From here to here is Virgo. From here to here is Leo. So that's why I say it's an intercepted sign, and I'm reading it as there's 2 energies at work here in this house. And we do have planets here. We have Jupiter and Venus. These are the benefics. This is, that powerful guy that comes down to the hood. That's him. It shows him there. And he comes for casual interaction, romantic, clandestine encounter. That's what he's doing there. That's very prevalent. And this is an asteroid called Black Moon Lilith. And Black Moon Lilith always is sort of clandestine, misbehaved activities, not necessarily socially correct activities. Virgo is on the cusp of the fourth house. It is hosting 2 planets, Jupiter and Leo, referring to persons of rank and high standing, community leaders associated with law and lawyers, and able to bestow benefit, or its opposite. If you piss them off, they can make life difficult for you because of the power and authority at their disposal. Jupiter is a well-liked and often trusted individual. It is accompanied by Venus. Also in Leo, Venus offers beauty, charm, money, gifts, fun, and all fine things. This is the house of the home and deep secrets. Was there an invitation to visit a large open property where Jupiterian activities occur? Jupiter owns Sagittarius. Sagittarius always refers to wide open spaces, land, horseback riding, hunting, all of those things. You can read that into it. The energies are certainly at play there. That's a question. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, the sign of the outdoors, hunting, horses, and archery. Was money offered, as denoted by Venus? Sagittarius is the sign on the 7th house cusp, the house of the killer, and Jupiter is its owner. You see what I mean? So it could say that, oh, this big important guy killed him. But there's so much more in the chart that I think that what happened was that maybe after the encounter with this big rich guy, either he lingered on or somebody saw the exchange that was taking place, and in an angry, defensive mode, they accosted Stephen. They surrounded him. They began belittling him. They maybe followed him. I don't know. Or maybe the big rich guy asked somebody to give him a ride back to his car. I don't know the dynamics that took place, and I'm not, maybe it's just my lack of understanding, but I'm not able to see that and pick it up in the chart yet. So it's not the chart's fault. It's me, the reader. I'm limited. And I am not infallible. I can make mistakes, but I'm pretty good at this. Stephen, lured here by someone he trusted, who then left him there. This is inferred by Saturn in Scorpio moving out of the 7th house and into the 6th. So you could see that. You can see that has that energy of being somewhere and then leaving it, leaving things behind you there, is here. At least I see that. Okay, let's move on. Virgo influences the 4th house by interception of the cusp. Mercury owns the house Virgo and Gemini sit on. Right. What I mean by that is Mercury. Remember that I mentioned, if I didn't mention, there are classic planets and there's modern planets. And so the classic planets are Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. The modern planets are Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. And yes, Pluto is still considered a planet. And then there's asteroids, and then there's luminaries. But when they divvied up the 12 zodiac signs, they gave each one a ruler. They assigned a planet to rule over it. When the new planets, the modern planets, came in, and what they did is they took some of those zodiac signs and they left a classic ruler who was already there in play, but they gave the modern planets co-ownership of that particular zodiac sign. So there are some zodiac signs, for instance, like Scorpio, it is co-ruled by Mars and Pluto. Neptune, co-ruled by Jupiter, Pisces, co-ruled by Jupiter and Neptune. In the case of some planets, they own 2 houses. They're the rulers of the 2 houses. Mercury is such a planet. It rules Gemini and Virgo. And then there's a planet like Jupiter that owns Sagittarius all by itself, but it co-owns Pisces. Mars does the same thing. It owns Aries all by itself, but it co-owns Scorpio. I know, it's more information than you need, but that's where all that jumbled mess of data is coming from. This is like a data mining exercise. If you haven't noticed that before, I may have said that. So let's go back up to there. Was Stephen lured here by someone he trusted, and then they left him there? And I am inferring this by the fact that Saturn was in Scorpio, or actually is in Scorpio, but is moving out of the 7th house of the killer and into the 6th, which means that he didn't do it. Whether he didn't do it, that's what this infers to. He was a catalyst to it, but he didn't do it. So, okay, let's start again. Now, Virgo influences the 4th house by interception of the cusp. Mercury owns the house Virgo and Gemini sit on, and we already discussed the condition of Mercury above. It is a critical player in this crime because Mercury is in that 29th degree, which is a line in the sand. Mercury also represents youthfulness or young people. So here is a group of young people. Fortuna, let's talk about that. This is one of those Egyptian parts. Lots, they're called lots, the Egyptian lots. Fortuna, known par fortuna, is known as part of fortune, is also in the fourth house, in the sign of Virgo. Now, par fortuna does not represent good or bad fortune, but a spin of the wheel of fortune, and the roulette wheel may fall where it will. It is about events not in one's control that converge on a set of circumstances and bring about a fated result, for good or ill. In this case, it fell into a losing position. Now, the house, this fourth house, is associated with the grave. Ancient astrologers linked it with the characteristics of Saturn. Virgo on the cusp brings Mercury and its critical degree into play here. Do you see? Are you getting the feel for that repetitive theme? Fate, fate, fate. With an older guy, that was the link. This fatal meeting with this older guy led to this. That doesn't mean the older guy did it. That's how I'm reading this. We'll see. I could be totally wrong. We'll see. Let's see. So the part of fortune does not represent good or bad fortune, but a spin of the wheel of fortune, and the roulette wheel may fall where it will. It is about events not in one's control. We already read that. The house, okay. Bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, start again. Mercury in its critical degree in, okay, stop. Doop, 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 doop. Woo! Fate begins to resurface in this chart. The fourth house also emphasizes the home, land, and matters buried deep under the earth. Because Leo intercepts this house and Jupiter and Venus are visiting, this brings in a theme of a place of fun, celebration, and clandestine, casual, intimate encounters and romances. Jupiter conjuncts Venus here in the fourth in Leo. It is all staged as harmless fun and games. It also describes an involvement with someone of importance and prominence again. Considering what I said about the pars fortuna, this was a fated encounter with an older established individual of importance and prominence. The fourth house represents the grave, tombstones, and funerary processes also. And in this house, Jupiter conjunct Venus in Leo indicates an impressive and regal and large gravestone. The fifth house. Libra is on the cusp of the fifth. We will discuss Venus in a minute. First, let's talk about Virgo, which influences this house by intercepted cusp. Virgo is a sign of service, providing service, or receiving service. It is an energy of work. Virgo on the intercepted cusp of the fifth house of fun, speculation, casual romantic liaisons, gambling, and celebration brings work into the fun. I interpret this as someone attending a celebratory or fun event in a work capacity, like a bartender at a party or the stripper providing entertainment. The person is invited to the event as a worker rather than a fun recipient. Libra, on the cusp of the fifth house, is hosting the North Node there. The North Node represents the future or moving into the future. Libra represents the public, others, and open enemies, as well as business partnerships and agreements. This again makes me feel that Stephen was here to work and, as such, had an expectation of receiving some form of gain or compensation. Libra is the sign of beauty, harmony, other people, and what we reveal to others about ourselves, our public persona. Venus indicates that someone is conscious of their image, enjoys looking good, is aware of their attractiveness, and likes to flirt, and also likes to shop. In this case, Venus is paired with Jupiter, an older established benefactor, and Venus wants more than Jupiter is prepared to offer. Venus wants a relationship with the mighty Jupiter. Jupiter is in it just for fun. Wow. Libra also represents law and justice, another thing that keeps repeating. There must be a lot of lawyers in South Carolina. Justice would have to wait for a future time. In this fifth place, we also find Black Moon Lilith, the asteroid, representing the feminine force refusing to cooperate, saying, no, I don't do that. No, I want more. So let's move into the sixth house. The sixth house is owned by Scorpio and influenced by Libra. This is where, among other mundane and routine repetitive tasks, it shows the job. The job here is associated with some form of behavior that is taboo. The victim is here to provide service, but wants more. Here we find the VX or vertex. This is a point that in a chart represents a fated point. The vertex here is in the sign of Virgo. This tells of a fated meeting between someone of a mercurial, youthful, cunning, illusionary character, that would be Stephen, and another more serious personality. This other personality is Saturn, which is here in Scorpio and represents a deep, dark, heavy, intense, and cruel person. It is someone who hides their dark side. This person, however, is familiar to the victim. Who did Stephen perform a service for as a worker in a high-risk industry this night? Usually people in this type of work refer to their work as servicing their clients. Thus, the sixth house and Virgo make sense. Let's move on to the seventh house. Sagittarius is on the cusp of the seventh house. The owner of this house is Jupiter, and Jupiter is not home, but in the fourth house in Leo and Virgo's property, living it up. This house points to the killer. Although there are no planets here, we can see that Saturn just left. We also see that Jupiter's involvement is just for fun, yet the victim wanted more. Jupiter intended to end things. Are legal wranglings manipulated by an older individual meant to cover up a crime here? Here is a person who can be cold, detached, professional, prominent, serious, and able to compartmentalize. He is charming and cunning at the same time. This exudes a look over here, not over there vibe. He customarily plans and designs strategies. He controls the narrative and manages the outcome. He often works with Scorpio to hide, bury, and clean up the mess. You will see below that Saturn and Pluto are in mutual reception, working evil deeds together. Scorpios can represent illicit or promiscuous encounters, taboos, but the seventh house is quiet and not revealing much. If you want to find the killer, look to the law. So again, I don't know if I explained what mutual reception was, but let's find Saturn here. Saturn, no, this chart won't. Sorry. Let's refer to the chart here. So here is the seventh house. And here is Saturn that has moved out of the seventh house into the sixth house. But as you can see, it is in Scorpio. So Saturn is in the sign of Scorpio. And if we move up here to the eighth house, we see that Saturn owns this house and Pluto is visiting it in Scorpio. And that's what we mean by mutual reception. They're in each other's signs. But these two guys are friends. We saw in the case of the moon and the sun that they were mutual receptions, but they weren't friends because they were two opposing energies. These two guys are buddies. They're friends, real tight, might even be family. The eighth house. Capricorn is on the cusp of the eighth house, but Sagittarius and Uranus influence it by intercepted cusp. Capricorn owns the eighth house of taxes, debts, other people's money and assets, the belongings of the dead. Is Saturn planning another accidental suspicious event meant to cause significant injury, prompting a lawsuit to collect millions from insurance settlements and legal representation costs. We've seen this before. It seems to be quite common in the Low Country. I already explained that Saturn is not home. It is in the 6th house, having just left the 7th. It will soon meet up with the vertex of this chart, where a fated event will occur to someone, perhaps someone who is a subordinate. But as Saturn is hosting Pluto, who owns the 6th house of employees, they are working together on a dastardly deed destined to end in unintended consequences. Saturn and Pluto are in mutual reception, indicating they are working together from each other's zodiac signs to clean up this mess. Pluto is in Capricorn, Saturn is in Scorpio. I just showed you that. These two forces are friends, and like I said, possibly even family. Let's move into the 9th house. Aquarius is on the 9th house cusp. The 9th house is spirit and a surprise. This one was really heavy, I found. The deep philosophical associations of this house indicate that spiritual guidance is here. A surprise will be revealed through advances in forensic. The deep philosophical associations of this house indicate that spiritual guidance is here. A surprise will be revealed. It's tough when you don't have it. The deep philosophical associations of this house indicate that spiritual guidance is here. A surprise will be revealed through advances in forensic technologies. Is something hidden in the electronic records? It's the second time that has come up. Saturn owns this house. It is not home. It is in the 6th house, approaching a fated encounter with a subordinate. The 9th house is quiet. Its clue is to look at wide open outdoor spaces. Its owner is Uranus, who is not home, but on the cusp of this chart's 11th and 12th houses, the place of friendships, groups, gatherings, and technology, as well as the end of life, the undoing, and the afterlife, and secrets that will never be told. Here it assures the public and the masses that they will know what happened this night. The 12th is the afterlife. Is Stephen's spirit guiding this process to reveal the truth? The 9th house is empty, but the Uranian influence holds a surprise. We don't know what that is, but that's interesting. The 10th house. Pisces, Aquarius is on the cusp of the 10th house. This is the highest part of a chart. Usually if you can't find an answer to who the killer is in the 7th house, which it points to Saturn, the older guy, but something in my gut doesn't feel that is confirmed. It just feels Pisces, Aquarius on the cusp of the 10th. Neptune and Jupiter co-own this house. Neptune is home. Deception and illusion is everywhere. So much is being manipulated. Someone is hiding in plain sight. Now remember, Jupiter owns the house of the killer. So this keeps pointing to some lawyer, some older guy, some benevolent guy that everybody thinks is benevolent, who was seen as a benefactor by Stephen. Poor guy. Jupiter is visiting the 4th. Jupiter is law. Neptune is home, here in the 10th house in the sign of Pisces. It is the deceiver. Staging is implicated. Manipulation meant to confuse. Uranus rude technologies will reveal many facts. Uranus in Aries indicates a sudden, unexpected, unintended, tragic result. This was not meant to happen, but it did. Can it be proven, or will the results be inconclusive? This is almost like an inconclusive chart. I've never experienced this before. The 11th house. Aries is on the cusp of the 11th house. The owner is Mars, who is not home. Mars is in the 2nd house, almost in a Cassimi with the sun. Cassimi means
consumption. It's like conjunct. The sun is on it. I explained that, where the sun, it either consumes the planet or it empowers it. In this case, it's empowering it. Mars is in detriment, out of its element, and not functioning at its best. It loses control. So the sun is empowering Mars, and Mars is no longer in a good, strong position where it can direct those energies in a positive way, and it loses control. Let's look at who else is here in the 11th house. It's busy here this night. A lot is going on. It holds Chiron, the wound that cannot be healed, and is embedded deeply in duplicity. The South Node in Aries talks about leaving things behind, something or someone from the past. Karma is here. The moon in Aries, vulnerability to the head, caught off guard, not expected, sudden impact that explodes the head from an object that comes quickly. Associated with Mars, what could that be that is like a blunt object? A baseball bat, a golf club, or the butt of a rifle? I don't know. What do you think? Things get out of hand and violence erupts. Was this intended to appear as if a critical roadside accident had occurred? One that caused trauma and injury, perhaps paralysis, but not necessarily death, so that an insurance lawsuit could be filed, but it turned fatal? Something went wrong? Let's go to the 12th house. Taurus is on the 12th house cusp. Taurus is a fixed, set, stubborn, slow-moving sign. The 12th house is the place of undoing and death. But Taurus is a peaceful sign, which gives me the feeling that Stephen is at peace. The 12th house is the place of undoing, death, the afterlife, psychological matters, and clandestine meetings for pleasure. Venus also owns the 5th house, because Libra's on the cusp. Venus, the house of secrets, 12th and 5th, because it's on the cusp of the 5th house because of Libra, and Venus owns Libra, and it owns Taurus. So this shows that this is Venus, also known as the Venus also owns the 5th house. Remember, Libra's on the cusp. Venus, the house of secrets, because it also owns the 12th house, and because of its influence from the 5th house's house of romantic and clandestine encounters, and remember that it's conjunct Jupiter, it shows a clandestine encounter with someone of rank and power. This is about the 3rd or 4th time that that comes out. So if they can figure out who this person that Stephen was seeing is, we can unravel this case, because that person holds the key. And again, I'm not saying that that person necessarily killed him, but he was involved in some way. Whether it was, like I mentioned, was he trying to, hey, this kid is, expendable, and let's have him have an accident, and then we can stage another insurance claim, and then maybe something even more incriminating will be discovered in the forensics of the technology. So we'll have to wait for those things. We've waited 8 years. What it means is that a sudden, unexpected act, a war of words, gets out of hand, and a fatal injury to the head ends Stephen's life. The instigator that leads to this is a much older man. Could the car have been staged? Was Stephen the unfortunate victim of an intended to look like vehicle hit and run event that would cause him massive injury, but not necessarily death, so that a lawsuit could be launched, but it went awry? What went wrong? And so I end this chart with WTF, I can't even believe this is where the chart led me. And so Oh, there you have it. That is my interpretation of the Stephen Smith chart. And I did a complete chart reading, so I will not be recharting this. I would be interested in what you got out of it. What are your suggestions? We can all speculate together. What do you think happened? I know that a lot of you aren't here for the astrology portion of it, but this is how this channel came to be, is because of my interest in astrology, and I wanted to see if I could use astrology to unravel clues or answer my own questions that I had about crimes that were trending in the news right now. Now, I will be doing a separate video on Stephen Smith, and it'll be his backstory. And I'll try to be as thorough and do as much research as I can so that we can get a better picture of who this young man was. There was a lot going on in Stephen's life, and the chart shows that. He was interacting with a lot of people. He was involved in some risky behaviors and businesses. And maybe in the backstory, we'll be able to figure that out. Why did he go that route in his life? Anyway, thank you so much for visiting. I encourage you to please feel free to leave me a comment. Share this video. That really helps. Sharing the video really helps. It helps the algorithms push the channel and helps me grow the community here. And other than that, if you enjoyed this at all, consider subscribing. At least give me a thumbs up. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.